always locked his door. She thinks, okay, he's probably out and back at the pool. He liked to sun himself out there, get a tan. She opens up the door and the apartment is pitch dark. She makes her way through the apartment straight ahead to the Arcadia door that looks out on the pool. No one is there. In fact, the pool's under repair at the time. She ducks back in, takes a right, pushes open the bedroom door, and she sees a form lying in the bed. She thinks it's a woman because there are these long, dark streaks of what she believed was hair. It turns out those streaks were blood coming from Bob Crane's head. At this point, she thinks it's a woman. She believes a woman has taken her own life with a gun. She sees the blood, lets out a scream, takes a closer look, thinks it might be a man. She's not sure. She thinks it might be Bob or it might be his close friend, John Carpenter. That's how close Crane and Carpenter were, that she would have thought Carpenter might have killed himself in Crane's bed. She didn't know what was going on. She runs out of the apartment. They call the police and fire arrives. Police arrive. And we come to realize it took a while that it was Bob Crane in that bed, bludgeoned to death with a blunt instrument. A brutal, brutal killing.
And around his neck?
Tied a video power cord from the camera in the living room.
Unbelievable. Now let's talk about John Carpenter, who was Mr. Carpenter.
Yes. Carpenter's an interesting guy because Crane met Carpenter on the set of Hogan's Heroes in the mid-'60s, introduced, by the way, by Richard Dawson, who played Peter Newkirk on the show. Richard Dawson introduces Carpenter to Crane. The reason Carpenter becomes an interesting figure in all of this is that Carpenter was the first video salesman, national video salesman for Sony Electronics. He was one of the first guys with access to video cameras, home video equipment. He was starting to introduce the well-heeled in Hollywood to this new technology. Red Skelton, Elvis, by the way, other people, other notables, the Smothers Brothers, people he introduced to this technology, showed them how to work this equipment. It was bulky, big, bulky equipment. And so Richard Dawson introduces Carpenter to Crane on the set of Hogan's, and they become kind of fast buddies. They share a fascination with photography, with women, and electronics. Those were the things that bound these two. So they would go out and pick up women, and as time went on, especially once they hit the dinner theater circuit and Crane was on the road, with unencumbered by anything, he supplied Crane with this video equipment that was not easy to get, by the way, in the early 60s and mid-60s. You couldn't get this stuff by going to a store. Carpenter had it, and he used that to gain access to the rich and famous, in this case, Crane. He supplies Crane with this video technology, and the two on the road, Crane would go out on the road for dinner theater, and Carpenter would meet him at least once a month to do work, apparently, but there was no work done. Carpenter would go to these cities and not do any work, really. He would mainly hang around, cat around with Bob Crane after the performance of Beginner's Luck. They'd try to pick up women. They'd try to take them back to Crane's apartment where the array of video equipment was set up, and they would have sex with women and videotape it. Carpenter as the kind of the operator, the camera operator. And he would get seconds on all of this stuff. And this is how they operated. But by the summer of 1978, there's evidence that Crane was growing tired of Carpenter hanging around, that Crane had become very good at running this equipment on his own. He didn't need Carpenter anymore. He could do it himself. And he just didn't need this guy hanging around. And that's where the fissure was that police believe started to really open up during that trip to Scottsdale.
In the interest of time, he becomes the suspect. There is not an immediate trial, right? It took some years for them to get him to trial. 16
years.
Right.
There were two prosecutors that passed on it. Let me go back on as to why John Carpenter became such a central figure in the murder case. The day that Bob Crane turns up dead in his apartment, John Carpenter leaves. He'd been in town. He had been in an apartment, a hotel down the street from Bob Crane's apartment, and had left that morning hastily by all accounts. Left his rental car, turned in his rental car, and went back to California. And then, while investigators are in Crane's apartment, the phone rings, and it's John Carpenter. This is John Carpenter. I'm looking for Bob. Well, Bob's not here, and they put him off. And Carpenter started to say, "Hey, I'm in L.A. I just let him know I'm back. I've been here. Everything's fine." And he was trying to, according to police, establish a timeline, that he was starting to create an alibi and was also sniffing around for evidence as to what police were onto and how far they might be in the investigation. The big one, though, was the next day, the day after the murder. They find John Carpenter's rental car because they become suspicious, and in his rental car, they find blood on the passenger side of John Carpenter's rental car, 1978 Chrysler Cordoba. That blood, as they test it, comes back B positive, Bob Crane's blood type. They're thinking, okay, wait a minute. This guy is his friend. He leaves quickly, heads to L.A. He's one of the last people to see Crane alive, and now there's blood in his car. You can imagine, he vaults up the list of possible suspects. And that's how Carpenter became the focus of police. And frankly, they have never left that position for 40 years. The investigators in this case believe Carpenter was Bob Crane's killer.
Why did it take so long to bring him to trial?
2 prosecutors passed on this case, Hallie, because they did not feel that they had it. They had blood in the car. That's interesting, and it's the same blood type as the victim. But nobody could place John Carpenter at the murder scene. There was no murder weapon ever found. There was no murder weapon with prints on it. They interrogated Carpenter twice on audio tape, once in Scottsdale, once in L.A. They even interviewed him another time in L.A., the first time, where they started asking him about even the blood in the car. He never cracked. There was no confession. They just didn't. These 2 prosecutors did not feel they had it. And so it took a new prosecutor elected in 1988, Rick Romley, who came in and said, let's take another look at this case. This case deserves some finality. Let's figure out what's going on here. They reopen the case, they take it from square one, and they arrive right back where they were in 1978, that John Carpenter is the guy. And they finally put him on trial in 1994. So the jury, right from the get-go, had issues with this because they're thinking, why did it take so long to bring this guy to trial? It was an uphill climb.
Okay, so he is acquitted. And I want to establish here that to the day that he died, he said he didn't do it, in fairness to him.
That's right.
So let's just get that on the thing. Okay, now let's talk about John Hook with the great voice. John, you're 18 years old when this is going on. You're just a little pup yourself. What gets you into this story?
I grew up with this guy. Bob Crane was on the television from the time I can remember television. I was 5 years old when that show hit the air, and it was a huge smash, and I vaguely remember it, kind of as vaguely as I remember seeing the Beatles on Sullivan and then later appearances. It's kind of that thing. It's there, but it's foggy. But as I grew up and I got older, I started seeing this in rerun, and I thought the guy was absolutely hilarious. I thought the show was amazing. Set in a Allied prisoner of war camp. It's crazy. The bumbling Germans is a hilarious storyline. By the way, this is a very popular show in Germany, believe it or not. They think it's hilarious and still do. So he was with me all along. And then I head out to Arizona State University when I'm 18. And I get out there and realize that Bob Crane was killed right up the road a month before I arrived in Tempe, Arizona. He was killed 7 miles up the road in Scottsdale, 7 miles from my dormitory. And so, again, full circle. There's Crane, part of my life. And then I interview his son, fast forward to 2016. I interview his son, Bob Jr., for what was going to be kind of a one-off. We were going to do an interview with him about his book, about his father, and that would be that. But after that interview, for days afterwards, I was just kept thinking about this case and thinking about it and thinking about it, mainly driven by the fact that Bob Crane's son did not have any finality, no closure. I hate that word. He hates it too. But they didn't really know for sure who killed their father. I'm speaking about the whole family. And I just thought it was terribly unfair. And as I thought about it more and more, I just got this crazy idea, where's the evidence? If we could find it, if it still existed, and I believed it would still be around because Carpenter was found not guilty, so the case is technically open. I thought the evidence has got to be around. If we can find it, can we get the blood evidence? And if we can get the blood evidence, can we retest it using modern DNA science that might give us an answer they couldn't get in the late 80s and early 90s when they were testing this stuff to prepare to put John Carpenter on trial? Yeah, that was the predicate.
It's fascinating. Let me digress for a second because there are a couple of things
Sure.
I want. Lots of kids in this Crane family, and I was nosing around a little bit, and it's interesting to me. I mean, there's some crazy here too. I don't want this to be all black and white. There's some gray areas here. At one point there was a website talking about Crane had penile implant, blaming.
Oh, yeah.
There's blaming Crane's second wife or third wife. I can't keep track of which was which. Second wife, that she did it because she wanted the money, that she was going to, the money, this, that, and the other thing. I want to, and I don't know where each kid is on all of this and what kind of relationships the kids from the different marriages have. I just want to throw that out there just because I think it muddies the waters a little bit and brings in the gray. So that it's not, because I don't think we want a black and white story, because I don't think there is any such thing as a black and white story. Okay, so now you do.
And this one certainly isn't. I mean, there are as many theories about what happened to Bob Crane as the Kennedy assassination. I'm not kidding. That is not hyperbole. That is the truth.
Is that because, after you did all this research, is that because you think that there really are that many things, or do you think people just pop off on all of this because it's a whodunit and there was never really an answer?
Yeah, there was never someone convicted of the crime, so that leaves it wide open, right? Could they have gotten it wrong? And I will tell you, I still have my own doubts about this, and the reason I have those doubts is because when we did the blood and we retested the blood evidence, the stains off of John Carpenter's rental car, the idea was that the blood in the car was from Bob Crane. And if there's blood in John Carpenter's car, not from somebody type B positive, but from Bob Crane, that is almost a lock that John Carpenter killed him, and that the blood was probably deposited from the murder weapon that he took in the rental car to dump it, driving away from the murder scene. I mean, it makes sense. A lot of times in these things, the easiest explanation, the simplest explanation is often right. But in this case, what we got back was not Bob Crane's DNA. And that really does raise a question in my mind about, is it possible that there is someone unknown to police that they missed? I mean, we've had this happen before. It is possible. I don't give it a high probability, but it is possible.
Does Carpenter have family?
Carpenter's wife still remains in Los Angeles, and he's got a son from an earlier marriage that testified at trial, testified that John Carpenter his father had a anger problem, and that he would sometimes almost get in a blackout kind of state where he became obsessed with taking out whoever was causing him problems. The idea here being that if Bob Crane was severing the relationship with John Carpenter in the summer of '78, that might have been reason enough, almost like a jilted lover, that he was feeling like Crane was discarding him after all their time together, throwing him away like a piece of trash, and he snapped. That's the police theory. But I'll tell you, people who've read my book, a lot of them, one of the first questions they ask, they say, would this have been enough for a guy to murder his best friend? Just to say, hey, I don't want to hang out with you as much anymore. I don't want to hang out with you at all. Would that have been enough? Would that have been enough of a motive for murder? A lot of people ask me that question, and it's a great question. I don't have an answer for that.
Well, now there are other aspects to it, because there are some who think that they were involved in a gay relationship,
right? So
that it became much more emotional than just two guys having fun doing their little shtick together.
Right, right, and that has never been proven, but there has been speculation about this. Bob Jr., who's a very open guy, he's lived his whole life in Hollywood. He said, "No, my dad was heterosexual through and through." He's the kind of guy who would not have a problem saying, yeah, I think Dad may have had a relationship with Carpenter. I think, he was asked this early on by police, and he said, no, my dad is hetero through and through. But you never know, right? You never really know for sure.
There is something else. When Robert Jr. was, 16 years old, his father was telling him all about the crazy sex trip that he was on?
Yes.
Now, that's weird. Come on.
It is. Bob Crane's idea of the talk, the birds and the bees talk, was to show his son, Bob Jr., pornographic videotapes. I mean, it's a little odd, no doubt. And Bob Jr.
I would use a better word. I haven't interjected this whole time. I'm going to use a different word than a little odd. I mean, there's perversion there to have that conversation with the son, and I think that's very telling too. I mean, this guy, and by the way, it wasn't just filming sex. I mean, there was what do they call that? What's his name?
Erotic asphyxiation. investigation, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, there was that going on too, from what I read.
I have never again seen evidence of that in any of the police documents, but I know that there has been wild speculation about what went on. The one thing that should be made clear here is that the women who were on these videotapes, people have said, well, did he secretly tape them? Everything I've seen, and I have seen